At first, it sounded routine, a small accident at home, nothing more. Reports said that Ace Frehley had slipped in his studio, suffered a minor fall, and was resting under his doctor's orders. Fans sent messages of concern, but most assumed he'd bounce back like he always did. After all, this was the spaceman, the man who'd survived decades of chaos, addiction, and near-death moments. A simple fall couldn't stop him, but what no one realized then was that this fall was different. Behind the carefully worded statements, something far more serious was unfolding, because, as doctors would later reveal, that minor accident was only the beginning, the start of a rapid, invisible decline that no one saw coming. It wasn't just a stumble, it was the moment the music stopped, quietly, without warning. In the days after his fall, Ace Frehley was expected to recover. His team reassured fans that he was resting comfortably, and that the injury wasn't serious. But behind closed doors, doctors began noticing something was wrong. Headaches, slurred speech, brief moments of confusion, all symptoms that hinted at something far beyond a simple bruise. A few days later, scans reportedly revealed the truth. Ace had suffered a brain bleed, a dangerous internal hemorrhage that can develop quietly after head trauma. At first, even his doctors thought the bleeding might stop on its own. But as the swelling increased, his condition began to deteriorate. Within hours, Ace went from being under observation to being rushed into intensive care. According to medical reports, he was placed on ventilator support as his body fought the swelling inside his skull. It was no longer just about a fall, it was a race against time. His family gathered, his management went silent, and the world waited for updates that never came. The public only saw silence, but inside that hospital room, one of rock's greatest icons was fighting for his life. And for the first time, the outcome didn't depend on willpower or fame. It depended on medicine, chance, and time. Just a week after his fall, Ace Frehley's management quietly announced that the remainder of his 2025 tour was being canceled. The official reason: ongoing medical issues. At first, it sounded temporary, a short pause until he got back on his feet. But for longtime fans, something about the tone felt different. Ace had been on the road almost non-stop for decades. Through broken bones, exhaustion, even hospital visits, he always came back. Canceling a tour wasn't in his nature, and that's what made this announcement so alarming. Behind the scenes, sources now say the decision came straight from doctors, not from Ace himself. He had wanted to finish the shows, even joked about performing with a cast if he had to. But physicians insisted he rest, not just for recovery, but for survival. By then, the swelling in his brain had begun to affect his coordination, speech, and balance. For the first time, Ace listened. The man who once defined rebellion was forced to accept something he'd never faced before: fragility. Fans online began piecing it together: the sudden silence on his social media, the missed interviews, the vague updates from his team. It all pointed to something bigger than anyone had been told. The tour was over, but the fight for his life had only just begun. And just a reminder, every deleted tweet, fake statement, and PR cover-up takes hours to piece together. Sometimes, we have to connect the dots ourselves based on fan reports, old interviews, and what should have been said. If you want to help this channel keep going, press join and become a member. You'll be directly supporting the work behind every video. Okay, back to the story. By early October, what began as a minor fall had turned into a full-blown medical crisis. Ace Frehley was rushed to a New Jersey hospital after his condition reportedly worsened overnight. Doctors confirmed the bleeding in his brain hadn't stopped, it had spread. He was placed in intensive care, surrounded by machines, fighting for consciousness. At that point, every minute mattered. Medical teams worked through the night monitoring swelling, oxygen levels, and neurological responses. Family members were contacted and quietly flown in. His inner circle later said that even in those moments, they hoped for a miracle. Ace had beaten the odds before, but this time, his body was failing him faster than the doctors could keep up. Within 48 hours, he was placed on ventilator support, sedated, unresponsive. For a man who had lived his entire life on stage, moving, laughing, defying gravity with his guitar, the stillness was unbearable to witness. Friends and fellow musicians sent messages, some unaware of just how dire things had become. His management chose silence, wanting to protect his privacy. But the truth was spreading fast. Ace Frehley, the heart of Kiss's wildest years, was in critical condition. Those closest to him say the hospital room felt like a museum of memories, the quiet hum of machines replacing the roar of amplifiers. And for the first time in 50 years, Ace wasn't the one setting the rhythm. He was waiting, as the doctors fought to keep the music alive. As more details surfaced, doctors began piecing together a pattern. The fall might have triggered the crisis, but it wasn't the only cause. For years, Ace Frehley had lived the kind of life that takes a toll on the body: decades of touring, sleepless nights, and the relentless demands of being a rock icon had left behind quiet damage, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but builds up over time. Close friends say Ace had complained of dizziness and fatigue in the weeks before his fall, but brushed it off as exhaustion. He had always prided himself on being the indestructible one, the guy who kept going no matter what. But doctors now believe those were early signs that something was already wrong. Small warnings that his body was reaching its limit. There were also whispers of old injuries catching up with him: years of stage accidents, falls from platforms, the wear and tear of performing under bright lights for hours, night after night. Even after leaving Kiss, Ace never slowed down. He was still recording, touring, and planning a new album when the accident happened. Medical specialists who reviewed his case reportedly said that the fall acted as a trigger event. The brain bleed might not have happened without it. But the pressure, the stress, and the existing strain made recovery nearly impossible. And that's what makes his story so haunting. It wasn't one fall that ended Ace Frehley's life, it was everything that came before it. A lifetime of living louder than anyone else finally caught up to him in silence. Doctors now believe that Ace Frehley's fall wasn't the true cause of his passing. It was merely the spark that set everything in motion. What happened afterward was a chain reaction that even the best medical care couldn't stop. After the initial head injury, a slow, hidden bleed began deep within the brain, small at first, but growing steadily. At that stage, symptoms can seem harmless: mild confusion, fatigue, imbalance. But as the pressure builds, the brain starts to shut down essential functions one by one. That's what was happening to Ace. According to hospital sources, within days of the fall, his coordination began to fail. He struggled to walk without assistance. His speech slurred, and his energy plummeted. It wasn't the kind of decline you could see from the outside, it was happening quietly inside. Doctors refer to it as a secondary event, meaning the real danger comes after the accident, when the body's natural response turns against itself. The swelling, the oxygen loss, the internal bleeding, all of it built up until his system could no longer recover. So when the headline said the fall was the start, they weren't exaggerating. It was the moment the clock began ticking. From that point on, Ace's condition wasn't just a medical issue, it was a countdown. And as friends later admitted, no one knew how fast that countdown really was. Inside the hospital, every decision carried the weight of a lifetime. Doctors treating Ace Frehley worked around the clock, balancing hope with reality. When he was first admitted, they tried to reduce the brain swelling with medication and controlled sedation, standard protocol for trauma patients. But as the hours passed, his condition didn't stabilize. Specialists reportedly met with his family to discuss options, including emergency surgery to relieve pressure. It's unclear whether that operation ever took place, but what is known is that Ace's brain activity began to fluctuate. The medical team had to make the hardest call any doctor faces to place him on full ventilator support. From that moment, Ace was no longer breathing on his own. Machines took over what his body could no longer do. His loved ones stood by his bedside, hoping for movement, for a sign, for anything. The doctors did everything they could, adjusting treatments, monitoring responses, running tests through the night. But, as one source put it, the damage was too deep, too fast. Eventually, the conversation shifted from recovery to comfort, to whether keeping him on life support was prolonging hope or prolonging suffering. In the end, the decision was made with love, not defeat. Because when a life has given so much to the world, sometimes mercy means letting the music fade gently, instead of forcing it to play on. When the news finally broke that Ace Frehley had passed, his family released a statement that read, less like a press release and more like a love letter. They wrote, "We are completely devastated and heartbroken. The magnitude of his passing is beyond words." It wasn't written by a manager or a lawyer, it was written by people who had just lost the man behind the makeup. A father, a friend, a soul who had always lived his life at full volume. Those close to Ace say his final days were peaceful. He was surrounded by family, held by those who had been there since the beginning, and kept comfortable by the medical team who'd fought for every heartbeat. A quiet song played in the hospital room, one of his own. As the machines slowly went still, the family chose to grieve privately, turning down major media interviews. They wanted to keep his final moments sacred, away from the noise of cameras and headlines. But their statement to fans carried one final message. Ace loved you all more than words, more than fame. Thank you for giving him a life worth living. After it was shared, messages poured in from across the world, not from tabloids, but from fans who'd grown up on his sound, who'd found courage in his chaos, and who now felt like they'd lost a piece of their youth. And in that moment, it didn't matter who wrote the statement, because it felt like Ace himself was speaking through it. When Ace Frehley fell, he wasn't slowing down. Not even close. At 74, he was still recording new material, still touring, still talking about the next chapter of his career. In interviews just weeks before the accident, he said he had more songs than time, and that he planned to release what he called his best solo record yet. But the fall changed everything. The sessions stopped. The studio went dark. Unreleased tracks and unfinished demos were left sitting on the mixing desk, some only half-recorded, others just scratch vocals and riffs. Now, those songs have become part of his legacy, fragments of a dream interrupted mid-chord. Industry insiders say his team is carefully cataloging the material he left behind. If released, it could become one of the most emotional, posthumous rock albums in decades, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Every take, every guitar squeal, every unedited breath reminds fans of the man who refused to fade quietly. And for the rock world, that's what makes Ace's loss so profound. He didn't go out as a retired legend. He went out as a working artist, still writing, still creating, still chasing the sound that made him who he was. It's a painful truth, but also a powerful one. Ace Frehley didn't die finished, he died mid-song. When the truth about Ace Frehley's condition became public, that the fall had triggered a devastating brain bleed, the rock world went silent. What began as confusion turned into collective heartbreak. Fans who had been holding out hope were now faced with the reality that the spaceman was gone, and that his final battle had been far more painful than anyone imagined. Tributes came pouring in from every generation of musicians. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley issued joint statements, calling him an irreplaceable rock soldier. Younger artists from Metallica to Pearl Jam shared how Ace's playing had shaped their careers. Clips of his iconic solos flooded social media, each one captioned with some version of, "He made me want to pick up a guitar." For fans, the revelation about his medical decline changed everything. It wasn't just a rock legend dying, it was a reminder of how fragile even the strongest heroes can be. Many said it made them reflect on how quickly time passes, how often the greats leave before we're ready. Radio stations held all-day marathons. Old bandmates spoke quietly of their last memories with him. And on fan forums across the world, one phrase kept repeating, "The fall was the start, but the legend never fell." Because even though Ace's body gave out, his spirit, wild, reckless, and electric, still lives in every note he ever played. As the full story of Ace Frehley's final days unfolded, one message became clear. His tragedy wasn't just about rock and roll. It was a wake-up call about how fragile the human body really is, even for those who seem untouchable. Doctors later explained that what happened to Ace is more common than people realize. A simple fall, especially in older adults, can cause a slow brain bleed that shows little to no symptoms until it's too late. For a 74-year-old performer who'd spent decades on loud stages, in flashing lights, and under constant exhaustion, the risk was even higher. Fans began sharing stories of their own loved ones who had suffered similar silent injuries, small accidents that turned fatal days later. Hospitals used Ace's case as an example in awareness campaigns about post-concussion care and delayed trauma symptoms. Because what took his life wasn't carelessness or bad luck, it was the quiet danger of underestimating a fall. The irony was painful. Ace had survived the excesses of fame, addiction, and a lifestyle that should have ended him years ago, only to be undone by something as ordinary as gravity. Yet, in that irony lies the lesson he never got to teach himself, that strength isn't ignoring pain, it's facing it early. And maybe, just maybe, if his story helped someone else get help sooner, then even in death, Ace Frehley saved another life. In the end, Ace Frehley's story isn't just about how he died, it's about how he lived, and what his final days revealed about him. He was loud, fearless, imperfect, and unfiltered. A man who burned through life like every day was his encore, and even when his body failed him, his legacy never did. The fall was just the start, but what it started was bigger than any tour or record. It sparked conversations about health, aging, and humanity in a world that often forgets its heroes are mortal. It reminded fans that legends don't disappear in an instant. They fade in echoes slowly, leaving behind lessons hidden inside the noise. Ace once said in an interview, "I just want people to remember that I gave them something real," and he did. The solos, the chaos, the laughter, all of it was real. But so was the pain, and maybe that's what makes his story timeless, the way it balances glory and fragility, rebellion and regret. So now, the question isn't just what happened to Ace Frehley, it's what his story asks of us. Do we wait until it's too late to take care of ourselves? Or do we learn from the fall before it begins? What do you think? Did Ace's final chapter teach us more about music or about life itself? Like, if you believe true legends never fall, they just turn their silence into a song. Subscribe for more stories that remember the icons not just for how they lived, but for what they left behind. And to honor the spaceman's legacy, our rock-inspired merch drop is now live. 25% off for 1 week only.